Coming up from the American Battlefield Trust.
You see the eagle, Old Abe, a live eagle that went into battle on a perch. And I mentioned earlier the zigzag trenches. Do you see how they're zigging and zagging there?
It's a suicide mission. That's why Sherman will call this a forlorn hope.
And then, of course, we are approaching the U.S.S. Cairo.
This is one of the things that made Vicksburg the key. It's high bluffs and this railroad that could feed the Confederacy.
The camera doesn't do justice. Those are some steep, steep hills. I climbed that hill one time and I was bad out of breath. Here you're getting more views of the Vicksburg National Cemetery. Welcome to Vicksburg National Military Park. We're going to take a tour of the park itself today. We're standing in front of the Visitor Center, one of those iconic Mission 66 visitor centers from the 1960s. Now what we're going to see today, of course, is just the very final phase of the Vicksburg Campaign itself, where we talk about the assaults on May the 19th and 22nd, 1863, and then, of course, the 6 weeks of siege operations before the final capitulation of Vicksburg on July the 4th, which incidentally is right at the same time you're getting the culmination of the Gettysburg Campaign, Pickett's charge just the very day before the surrender at Vicksburg, and then you've got the Tullahoma operations going on in Middle Tennessee. So late June, July 1863 is a really, really busy time for the American Civil War. This military park was established in 1899 as part of what I call the golden age of battlefield preservation. It's when the veterans themselves could come back and determine specific spots. It's when the land was still available before the major urbanization of the Second Industrial Revolution. It's when veterans in Congress dominated the purse strings of the nation and were willing to appropriate money to do this. All of those factors go out the window pretty quickly in the early 1900s, and so this is the optimum time to preserve battlefields, and we get the big iconic ones like Vicksburg and Gettysburg and Shiloh and Chickamauga, Chattanooga, and Antietam. So these are the crown jewels of the battlefields here in the National Park Service system. So Vicksburg is established in 1899. We're going to tour basically what was built in the first decade or so of the 1900s. So we're going to go take our tour, come along, and we'll visit and see Vicksburg National Military Park. Alrighty, let's head out into the park and we'll navigate our way through the parking lot here. This is a little bit more visited than certainly Shiloh or someplace like that, and you can see the number of cars here, and you can see the Visitor Center on the right there. But we're going to take a left turn, head through the Memorial Arch, which is the entrance proper to the park. And there's lots of interesting stories here, of course, but this Memorial Arch is put up in 1917, or immediately after 1917. They had a big veterans reunion in 1917, which included veterans of both the North and the South that came back, and the leftover money appropriations from that was used to put up this large arch. Now the arch has sat several different places, but it's come to a home here, of course, in the entrance of the park. Now, as we enter, of course, you're going to see a lot of recreational visitors and hikers and so on, but you're going to also see a whole lot of monuments and markers, more certainly than Shiloh. I don't know how many are actually in Gettysburg, but there are around 1,500 here in the Vicksburg Park, which is often termed the art park of the United States. And each one tells a different story. For instance, this one, the 83rd Ohio, the Greyhound Regiment, they had the mascot of the Greyhound. They took that as kind of their mascot, and he winds up on the monument there. What you're going to see a lot of is really uneven terrain. Just looking off to each side, you'll see these big, huge ravines and hills, and this is a very desperate place, of course, to try to fight battles, assaults, and all of that. But it's pretty inhospitable just to even live in. Now you can see, of course, off to the right exactly how close we are to civilization. There's a Motel 6 right there. During the summer, of course, when the highest visitation is, you won't be able to see through all of that, but you can certainly. The interstate, in fact, is just right to our right over there. Now, speaking of the monuments and markers and so on, you're going to see various levels, or maybe a better word will be layers of interpretation here. For instance, to the right here, you see a National Park Service wayside dealing with Remember the Sacrifices. And I like that because it, as you're first getting into the park, you know, it's beautiful and you're looking at the different monuments and so on, but it's also very important to remember what happened here and that there are people that perished here fighting in this Civil War. But the various monuments and markers, while we're getting into some of the major sites, we can go ahead and just kind of give you an idea of what these mean and what they are. The blue tablets, we are riding along the first part of the tour route, of course, along what is called Union Avenue, and these will go along Union lines, Union siege lines, the line of circumvallation for you nerdy folks that get into technicalities and all of that. This is the line that rings the Confederates into Vicksburg. So you will see a lot of blue signs, blue denoting Union positions, very much like at Shiloh or Chickamauga. Red, of course, will denote Confederate. At Shiloh, for instance, you get the differentiation between the 2 days. The oval tablets are second day, the square tablets are first day. There's 40-something days of siege here at Vicksburg. I don't know if there are that many shapes or not in terms of parallelograms and triangles. You couldn't come up with that many shapes. So the blue tablets are going to primarily denote a couple of different things. Number one, like we see out the left right here, Union Trench, Quinby's / J.E. Smith, John E. Smith's division. So these will mark this initial Union line, siege line. You see out the left here, we have the Minnesota Monument. Another layer of monumentation will be state markers that some states will come in, just like at Shiloh and Chickamauga and Gettysburg, and put an individual monument to each unit. And you know, this monument right here will be a Minnesota monument. This one up here will be an Ohio monument. So each individual regiment or battery will get an individual monument. Others say, no, let's just do one state monument itself. And of course that was Minnesota right there. We didn't really mention much as we went by, but various states will place these individual monuments. Now another interesting type of monumentation here, and I'm not sure whether you can see this on the left here, but you'll see various examples as we go around the park. This is to Missourian George B. Boomer, who's actually killed here on the May the 22nd assaults. The original Park Commission in the late 1890s and early 1900s, mostly in the early 1900s because the park was established in 1899, they really went out to a full degree to get a portrait, a picture of every single general officer level commander here. So Army commander, Corps, division, brigade. If it's even a colonel commanding a brigade, then they wanted to get a picture. And the higher ups, of course, like Grant or McClernand, will get actually an equestrian statue paid for by the state of Illinois, obviously. But the lower level ones might get, for instance, a bust on a monument, as you see coming up here, just on the right here, and you place these, of course, in their positions where they're in command. That's Isaac Quinby, who was very sick during the Vicksburg Campaign. He and Marcellus Crocker will actually exchange the division of the 17th Corps back and forth. We are on the lines of Quinby's division during the both assaults and siege, and that is why the marker goes here. Here you see a a little bit of a lower level officer, which is only more kind of a relief rather than a bust itself. This is Charles Matthews of the of Iowa, who's a brigade commander. Here, for instance, we're just passing is Holden Putnam, the 93rd Illinois brigade commander. Even if you only commanded a brigade for just a short time, you got a command. Here's an Iowa regimental monument with the columns there, very beautiful. Of course, artillery is another layer, and it will mark artillery positions. Okay, we're coming up on one of the highlight areas of the park and get a good view. I mean, this is one of those areas that just shows you perfectly the terrain at Vicksburg. This used to be wooded. When I first started coming here as a kid, this was heavily wooded. You couldn't see across. I had no idea maybe what it looked like, but fortunately they've cut it out, and there was a little bit of controversy with some environmental groups and so on about cutting the trees and the habitats and all of that. But my thinking is that this is a historic park, and yes, you can do that as much as possible, but we're here to interpret what happened here, and this helps us do it a whole lot better. You can see, of course, the Illinois Monument across the way there in the Shirley House. We'll get to all of that, but these open view sheds are really wonderful in order not only to let you see what the park looks like now from side to side, but also what it looked like then. In 1863, it was completely open between the siege lines, which we're on the Union siege lines now, but we'll see the Confederate tablets on the other side. And of course, the Confederates are going to open up in front of their siege lines as much as possible to open up these fields of fire to keep the enemy from slipping up on you or something like that. So really important to be able to see what it was like then. This is the Michigan Monument, very pretty as well, ornate. It sets here at the first tour stop actually in the park. That is DeGolyer's Battery. I believe it's the 8th Michigan Battery. And you see an Army of the Tennessee Michigan monument there. But DeGolyer's Battery will be placed here across this expanse from the 3rd Louisiana Redan and the Great Redoubt. And if you come visit here and look, all the artillery are positioned facing the Great Redoubt, which stood on the opposite hill on the other side, and is one of the major Confederate fortifications ringing Vicksburg. Samuel DeGolyer himself is actually mortally wounded just to our right. The camps are down in the ravine to the right, just behind where the battery actually sits, and a bullet that must have just scraped the very top of the hill and just had enough fall just perfectly to get into his camp hit him, I believe, in the leg, and he never recovered, and he dies later on in the summer. So very, very sad case of that. DeGolyer's Battery had fought at Port Gibson, at Raymond, Champion Hill, very active here in the Vicksburg Campaign. So you're seeing again various layers of monumentation, what it all means, the blue tablets, the monuments, the artillery, as we're riding along this Union line of entrenchments hemming in Vicksburg. Now, I believe you'll be able to see out to the left, maybe when we make this little curve here, maybe a little better, you'll see the Illinois Monument, the Shirley House. But just in front of the Shirley House up here is a good example of Logan's fortifications and what they probably would have looked like now. It's my understanding that a lot of the fortifications that you see here at Vicksburg today have been refurbished a little bit, particularly maybe during the New Deal and so on, to give you something to see. We know that immediately after the siege, Grant orders all of the Union fortifications and approaches filled in and covered up and destroyed, and that is obviously because he doesn't want a besieging Confederate army to come back and use those approaches that he had used to take Vicksburg to retake Vicksburg. And so they completely scatter all of those and delete all of those. We also know that most of the Confederate works are absolutely pummeled during the siege, and most of them had been battered down by July, by the end of the siege. So there's not a lot of left of those either. Certainly the 3rd Louisiana Redan that we're going to see up here in just a second will be battered and blown to pieces with 2 mines, actually, one on June the 25th and one on July the 1st. But you can see what is left of Logan's, some of the original earthworks of Logan's division, Logan's approaches here out in this area. And there are a couple other places where you can see kind of what they would look like now if they were totally left alone and undisturbed. But the view shed here, absolutely wonderful. Now, as we come up on this rise, we're going to take a hard turn to the left, 90-degree turn to the left, and we'll be actually entering the Jackson Road. There are 6 major roads that enter Vicksburg, or exit Vicksburg, which your preference is, and railroad. So 6 major roads and 1 railroad. The Confederate fortifications, the 9 major fortifications will sit along those roads, all except one. One will be out in the middle. That's Fort Garrett or Square Fort. But the major Confederate fortifications will sit on these various roads as they fan out from Vicksburg like spokes on a wagon wheel, you know, a crescent-shaped part of the wagon wheel. The main entrance to Vicksburg, of course, is the Jackson Road. And if you look up to the right a little bit, if you can see, you'll see the old trace of the road. It is from this vantage point, the high ground back in there, that Grant actually will watch the assaults on May the 22nd. This is the assault area and approach area of John A. Logan's division, Blackjack Logan of the 17th Corps, and of course you see his statue there, put up obviously by the state of Illinois. So as we make this turn into the Jackson Road, we'll see a couple of major things. If you can see right through the woods there, you see the Shirley House, and it is basically from this vantage point that very famous picture is made of the Shirley House and all the shebangs and holes dug into the side of the hill and so on. So it's basically from this vantage point, you'll see the Shirley House up here. This will be the major battery put into position here, and it will also, of course, be pounding the 3rd Louisiana Redan, but it'll be the start of Logan's approach, which actually runs across the road here to our right. We'll go actually in front of the Shirley House. It'll wind around behind the Illinois Monument and then continue on toward the 3rd Louisiana Redan. I'll show you more of that in just a second. But we are also obviously coming up, there's a statue of John E. Smith, initially a brigade commander during the assaults and then division commander a little bit later on. But the Illinois Monument here, modeled after the Pantheon in Rome, probably the most ornate and largest monument on any Civil War battlefield. I don't know of any larger and more elaborate than this. We're going to stop and take a look here and get a little bit of a more detailed look in it. And since we're so close to 3rd Louisiana Redan, we're going to take a walk up there as well and get you a little more detail about this. And I'll tell you about all the names inscribed in the Illinois Monument. Every single Illinois soldier has his name inscribed, or her name actually. I'll tell you about that as well on the monument inside of it there. So let's hop out and get a picture of that. All right, we are on the steps of the Illinois State Memorial here at Vicksburg. It is probably the largest, most ornate, most elaborate memorial on any battlefield that I know of. I've been to most of them, and this is the crown jewel, I would say, modeled after the Pantheon in Rome. Inside, of course, has the bronze plaques that are the tablets that has the names of every, and they might have missed one or two, you know, who's counting? There's like 36,000 Illinois troops here. But they have the names of supposedly every Illinois soldier that fought here. from the lowliest private all the way up to the commander-in-chief himself, who did not fight here actually, but President Abraham Lincoln obviously was from Illinois. Another native son, of course, from Galena, Illinois, Ulysses S. Grant, did fight here, so those names are inscribed here. So it's at a very fitting place. Lots of Illinois troops fought here right in this general area, and there's really a lot to see out here, not to, mention the terrain that you can see in the background back here. This is just beautiful. The park has taken the trees down in between the siege lines so that you can kind of see what it was a little bit like at the time. Of course, it would have been much more scarred in a battlefield, basically, in 1863. But you can see the Union line on the east side there, and of course the Confederate line with the Great Redoubt, and the 3rd Louisiana Redan will be on this side. Now, the road in front is actually historic. That is the Jackson Road entrance to Vicksburg. And as we've talked about, I think I mentioned, there are basically 6 major roads and 1 railroad in and out of Vicksburg. This is the Jackson Road. This is the most important one. And so on May the 19th, James B. McPherson's 17th Corps would come and inhabit this area around the Shirley House, which you see have seen the Shirley House over there. It's the only historic structure on the battlefield from the time. The actual assault will occur on May the 22nd, when John E. Smith's brigade of Logan's division will actually move up the Jackson Road through that cut there and attack the 3rd Louisiana Redan. John D. Stevenson's brigade, also of Logan's division, will attack across those hills farther kind of that way toward the Great Redoubt, where you see the Louisiana Monument over there. So lots of action here during the assaults on May the 22nd. Thereafter, when Grant lays siege, there's a lot of action here as well. We're basically on the front of Logan's approach, which starts at Battery Logan over here and zigzags right through the front yard of the Shirley House, kind of behind the Illinois Memorial here, and then through the road cut through Battery Hickenlooper and on up to the 3rd Louisiana Redan, where they ultimately will blow a mine, or 2 mines actually, on June 25th and July the 1st. And we're going to walk up there and give you a little more information on that. But lots to see right here in this specific area, and that's one of the reasons we stopped here, and give you a little bit more detail on what all's going on here. All right, we've walked up the Jackson Road right around kind of the trees there, and basically followed the route of the Union advance on May the 22nd and the assault here against the 3rd Louisiana Redan. And we are standing in what is left, or what would have been, the 3rd Louisiana Redan. One of the 2 major fortifications guarding the Jackson Road, which you can see the Jackson Road, the cut as it goes through here. The other is the Great Redoubt, which you can see the very top of the Louisiana Monument right over there, and it is there on the 22nd that John D. Stevenson's brigade will assault at that point. When the assaults fail during the May 22nd advance, then we turn to siege operations, and there will be an approach called Logan's Approach that will come along, basically along the Jackson Road there. By late June, that approach reaches all the way to the Louisiana Redan. In fact, that blue tablet that you see, the back of it right there, indicates the beginning of mining operations. Under the Corps engineer, Andrew Hickenlooper, that's his statue right there. And Hickenlooper will oversee digging a gallery under the 3rd Louisiana Redan. They'll pack it with powder once it's done, and by June the 25th, they will blow it up. And so the front face of this Redan, and we could go into what Redans and Lunettes and Redoubts and all that is. It's just terminology. They're all fortifications. If you're really interested, you can dig a little deeper into the differences in a Redan and a Redoubt and a Lunette. When that mine blows, it blows the front end of the Redan off. This is June 25th, 1863, a full year ahead of the famous mine at Petersburg in 1864. There's a fight for some 26 hours for possession of the crater that results. Both sides funnel in reinforcements and troops and alternate regiments and so on. One of the Confederate units that is sent in is the 6th Missouri. Their colonel is a Missourian named Eugene Irwin. That's his monument right there. The back of it, of course, but he happens to be the grandson of Henry Clay, the famous great compromiser from the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, 1833, the Compromise of 1850, and so on. It's his grandson, and he's actually killed here in the fighting on June the 25th. So they dig a little deeper underground, and on July the 1st, they will blow another mine, which basically blows the side off of the 3rd Louisiana Redan. So there's not much of it left at the end of the siege. Of course, you're getting toward the end there. So lots of fight. There's no assault with the July 1st mine, but lots of activity around here. This is the highest ground on the battlefield. In fact, in Warren County, as I understand it, it's a good place to kind of get a view of just the extent of the siege lines here. In fact, if you can zoom in and look over to the north here, do you see that obelisk? That is the Navy monument. It's just right up the hill from the U.S.S. Cairo, which we're going to stop at in just a minute. And it is basically the extreme right flank of the Union lines, the left flank of the Confederate lines. Now they will basically do like a crescent, the side of a circle encircling Vicksburg, and they will extend all the way down. If you will look to the south there, see that grain elevator? That's on the river just south of the Mississippi River bridges. So that it's a little farther down, but that will kind of give you an idea of the extreme left flank of the Union lines or the extreme right flank of the Confederate lines as they oppose each other. So from down that area all the way around out through these lines here, all the way back over to the obelisk there, that kind of gives you an idea of the extent that we're talking about with these Vicksburg lines.
Hey there everybody, Andy Poulton here, video producer with the American Battlefield Trust. I hope you're enjoying this exclusive VIP tour of the Vicksburg battlefield with our good friend Tim Smith of the West. I know on my end I really enjoy being out there filming with him. I just wanted to remind everyone that we do have driving tour offerings for other national parks. So if you like this style, be sure to check out our tours of places like Gettysburg, Shiloh, Chickamauga, and Yorktown. And we will also have future tours available at places like Antietam, Valley Forge, and Saratoga. So with that, I want to thank you guys again for joining us, and we'll go ahead and hop back in the car with Dr. Smith.
All right, we're going to back out of here, and actually this is kind of one way we can't turn around on the dime here, so we're going to make this loop that we just kind of walked. And show you a couple of other little things maybe and get you a little more view of it. Some of you probably have heard of Coonskin's Tower. That's set just to the left right here of the Jackson Road, and that is Indiana named Foster, who built a tower out of cross ties, and he would lay them, you know, and you could go up in this thing, and he would shoot over into the Confederate lines from his tower, and it got so popular, even Grant came and climbed it, and it got so popular that he had to start charging admission to get up in his tower, and there's a great photo of it from back at the Shirley House there that shows Coonskin's Tower as well as the 3rd Louisiana Redan. It's also another interesting little aspect here that we didn't talk about on our trek up here. Stuart Tresillian, and I don't know if, let me get around here. Can you see a little monument down in the valley there? You can see kind of the back of it maybe. Stuart Tresillian is the engineer for Logan's Division, 17th Corps, and they were so close eventually to Confederate lines that the regular artillery that shot fairly straight and fairly level wasn't doing any good. It just kind of skip off and bounce and so on. So they needed mortars to lob shells into the Confederate lines, but they didn't have any mortars, any Coehorn mortars or anything like that. And so what they did, they took sweet gum trees, large sweet gum trees, and they bored out a hole in that sweet gum log just big enough for a shell, and they wrapped bands, iron bands around it to make it stronger, and they would shoot wooden cannons, real cannonballs, but out of wooden mortars over into the Confederate line there, which adaptability is one of the key things here, and that is one of the greatest examples. So you're getting a little better view of this side of the Illinois Monument in this cut that Battery Hickenlooper would sit on as the Union forces approach the 3rd Louisiana Redan. Again, we're on the Jackson Road, the main thoroughfare into and out of Vicksburg. And it's no coincidence that the Confederates actually have 2 fortifications on the Jackson Road. It's that important. All right, we're going to take a left up here along the tour route, of course, just past the Shirley House. Now, the whole time so far, we have been in the operation area of James B. McPherson's 17th Corps. At the Visitor Center a little bit, and A.J. Smith's division that we just barely started out, that's the very right part of McClernand's 13th Corps, but we hadn't really talked about that, but and we really didn't talk much about A.J. Smith. But when you get into Quinby's division and then Logan's division, you're all 17th Corps McPherson. The Shirleys that lived here, they're buried just right to the back there. I don't know if you saw that on the left. But continuing along the Union siege line here, but we're entering the 3rd Division of McPherson's 17th Corps. And that is MacArthur. John MacArthur, the Scotsman, wore the funny hat and the kilt and all that kind of stuff. The problem with this division, though, there are 3 brigades, but there's only 1 brigade present initially, certainly during the assaults, and that is under the command of Thomas E.G. Ransom, Tag Ransom. He will hold the position from here, actually Logan's position to Glass Bayou, but then from right about here as we cross Glass Bayou on northward towards Sherman's 15th Corps will be the lone brigade, certainly during the assaults, of MacArthur's division, and we'll see Ransom's place there. Now, because the Union line is pierced at this point, and for that matter, the Confederate line is as well, by this big valley of Glass Bayou that we're going, I don't know if you noticed going around, we'll meet ourselves going around these big curves and so on if we're not careful. To get down in here and to cross Glass Bayou, it took a little, doing to get out of here, and then we've got this big bridge. So this is Glass Bayou. And the only unit of McPherson's 17th Corps on the north side of Glass Bayou will be Ransom's brigade. So it's separated a little bit from the rest of the Corps, and in fact, certainly during the assaults, Ransom will operate more with the leftmost units of Sherman's Corps, namely Blair's division, Kilby Smith and Giles Smith's brigades. And here we're going again in circles, kind of to get back up out of this big valley. So Ransom will operate actually more so with Sherman's 15th Corps than he will with his regular 17th Corps across Glass Bayou there. So we're entering kind of a new area of operations here. This is some really rugged, look off there to the left, I don't know if you can see it down in there, but this is some really rugged terrain in here. In fact, it was kind of interesting. I was with a group, I don't know, a year or two ago, tracing the assaults and doing research and so on for the books as well, but tracing the assaults and tracing the approaches. And this ravine to the left over here, not this little one right here, but as we top this ridge in the next ravine, it's a feeder branch of Glass Bayou, comes in from the north and flows into Glass Bayou. But it is so substantial that we actually couldn't get through. We had to admit defeat and turn around and come back out and then go in from the opposite way. I've crossed it several times on farther up the watershed, but right down here where Ransom's approach was, and you see the tour stop 4 here, Ransom's gun path, it is so substantial and so steep and so much of a declivity that we just simply couldn't get through. So Ransom's brigade here, he will have an assault. He'll make assault on the 22nd. He'll be operating in this area on the 19th even, but make the major assault on the 22nd, and then he will begin siege operations with the approach immediately after the assaults. Now, we've got another major state monument here. This is the state of Wisconsin, and if you can get a good view of it, this is kind of like the Illinois monument in that and not nearly as many troops from Wisconsin as there are from Illinois, but all of the troops' names are listed on this monument down at the bottom there. At the top, which is really interesting, you see the eagle, Old Abe, which is the mascot of the 8th Wisconsin, live eagle that went into battle on a perch. Old Abe was in the battle at Corinth. Actually, his tether was either shot away or was came loose or whatever, and the bird would fly around and screech at the Confederates and dive at them, and they would shoot at him, and they called him the Yankee Buzzard. And they never shot him down. This is the first anti-aircraft fire, of course, but they never were able to shoot him down. But that's Old Abe. He was present at, of course, Jackson in the various operations of the Vicksburg Campaign, and then on to Vicksburg here and is atop the monument. Sad fate to Old Abe. He was taken, and there's been a little bit of discussion on whether he's a he or a she, and I think they've even done some DNA stuff now that determine that he was actually a he. But he was put, I believe, in the Wisconsin state capitol after the war, and there's Marcellus Crocker, who alternated with Quinby. But the building burned, and he died of smoke inhalation, which is a sad fate to the warbird. But it was not his end. They stuffed him, taxidermy and so on, and put him back in the Capitol. Well, that Capitol burned too, and apparently that time the whole thing burned down. So there's apparently not a lot left of Old Abe. But really interesting stories about the War Eagle, Old Abe. Here you see 11th Cavalry, Illinois. We're kind of in an area as we get into Sherman's 15th Corps, leave Ransom's brigade, 17th Corps, moving into Sherman's 15th Corps and operations around the Stockade Redan. It's again one of those that we're going to have to go around and kind of move across some rough terrain and so on. Maybe a good opportunity to kind of give you an idea of the various levels of action and so on that took place here. Immediately when the Federal forces begin to ring Vicksburg, Grant assaults right off the bat. He thinks he's got the Confederates on the run and they're demoralized and all that. Logically, I would have thought so too, and a lot of them were, but they're fresh divisions that weren't involved in Champion Hill and Big Black River Bridge and all that are ready to hold the line, and Pemberton's smart enough to put them on the main areas that will be assaulted. So Grant will assault on May the 19th. Just about all that occurs there is at the Stockade Redan. Frank Blair's division will make major assaults there, but they will be repulsed. Grant will try again. That was kind of hurried up. He will try again on May the 22nd with the whole army, and everybody attacks then, and we'll talk about several of those places. We just talked about it, the 3rd Louisiana Redan and so on. That fails as well, however, so Grant has to lay siege. So a lot of the markers and monuments, particularly up here at the Stockade Redan, will be dealing with those May 19th or 22nd assaults. Then you've got a lot of other markers that deal with what are called approaches to the Confederate fortifications. What an approach is basically a trench roadway, a road in a trench dug toward the Confederate lines. You never dig straight toward the enemy, of course, because they're going to be able to just shoot right straight toward you. Now, there are times when you have to do this, you have to approach straight on, and that is when you utilize what's called a sap roller, which is a big old cane bundle or a cotton bale or something you can move, but will be in front of you to shield you as you dig behind it. So as you progress forward and dig, you utilize the sap roller that is able to shield you from that. Otherwise, you try to dig at an angle, you know, not straight on, but you kind of dig this way and then you'll turn back and kind of go that way so that you will be covered as you're digging and not present yourself straight on. Some of the trenches here, and we'll see an example of this later on with Hovey's approach, are the classic zigzag, just zigging and zagging back and forth, in order to not present yourself as a target to the enemy. So as the Federals dig closer to the Confederate fortifications, there are two basic purposes for this. Number one, you want to get your forces close enough to the enemy fortifications that you can assault without having to go 400 or 500 yards over open ground. Here's, I believe, Giles Smith. No, that's good speed. The closer you are when you jump off, the better chance you're going to have, obviously, of being successful. The other major reason is that you can get close enough to dig a tunnel underneath the Confederate fortifications, pack it with powder, and blow the thing up, like famously at Petersburg in 1864, but here at the 3rd Louisiana Redan, of course, in 1863. So lots of mines go on as well, and lots of approaches toward the Confederate fortifications. And as we're stopping here at the Stockade Redan, we're on the Union side of Stockade Redan, we're going to get out here and we're going to see some of these in detail, and not only the approaches of Ewing's approach and Buckland's approach and Lightburn's approach and several of the approaches that take place here. We'll also see the confusing monumentation and tablature and so on of the May 19th and 22nd assault. So a lot of stuff goes on at, over a long period of time at the same spot, and you have to kind of figure out what goes with what, and then it all starts very much making sense. So let's get out and do a little bit more detail here.
Sherman's men first arrive here as Grant moves in on the city on the 18th, and they're going to assault on the 19th. Remember, Grant has had a string of victories as he's moved inland through Mississippi up to this point, where he's had a success at Port Gibson, at Raymond, at Jackson, at Champion Hill, at the Big Black. He wants to carry on that momentum and just keep pushing those Confederates and hopefully drive them away. So when he gets here, he launches these attacks on the 19th, trying to build on that momentum. And we can see this landscape behind me and just how tumultuous and violent this landscape is. And his men are going to assault from my left through this ravine that you can see behind me against one of the Redans that's protecting this road, the Graveyard Road, into the city. It's one of several roads that goes into Vicksburg, all of them like spokes converging on the center of a wheel. And Grant's going to assault along a number of those spokes as he gets to Vicksburg. Sherman's Corps, the 15th Corps, is asked to assault here along the Graveyard Road. There's a Redan, Stockade Redan, across the way that the Confederates are going to occupy that is protecting this road. And as Sherman makes those assaults on the 19th, his men will be repulsed. He's not going to have very much success. Grant's going to realize that these assaults on the 19th were pretty slapdash. He was going strictly on momentum. Momentum's not enough to carry through these miles and miles of Confederate works here. So he's going to try to re-strategize and come up with a second set of assaults on the 22nd. And we're going to follow those in. Those become what's known as the Forlorn Hope. On the 22nd, Grant is going to change his tactics here, and rather than try to assault through these ravines, he's going to go straight down the Graveyard Road toward the tip of the Redan. Now, before they'd been kind of attacking the broad side of it, but the Redan is shaped like a big V, and now he's going to assault the V. I think about, again, the salient at Spotsylvania Courthouse. You want to attack that tip. You don't get as much enemy fire pointed at you. So what he's going to do, first of all, is send a party down this road to try to lay down some bridge work and ladders to facilitate the assault. He's going to ask for 50 volunteers from all three of the brigades in the 1st Division that's going to push forward. That's going to be Frank Blair's division. Hugh Ewing's men are going to be in the lead, and what Blair's going to do is stack up his 3 brigades in a big column. Followed then by the division of James Tuttle. He's going to stack up his 3 brigades as part of that column as well. So we're going to have this big fist that is going to push down this road with those 150 volunteers plus 2 officers from each of those lead brigades. The only people who are allowed to volunteer for this are men who have no wives or children at home. It's a suicide mission. That's why Sherman will call this a forlorn hope. Of those 150 men, the men in the lead are going to carry big planks that they're going to use to put across the ditch in front of the fort. The next 50 men are going to carry cross beams that they can then build a bridge. And then the final 50 men are going to carry ladders that then the assaulting column will be able to use to go up the side of this Redan. Defending the Redan is going to be the 30th Mississippi under Hebert. And we've got Francis Cockrell's Missourians. We've got the 1st and 5th Missouri in there as well. So as the forlorn hope gets out through this area, and we're walking through a road cut right now, and they've been under cover up until this point. But once they come out from this road cut, it's a mad dash of about 150 yards to the point of the Redan, which is going to be right in front of me. The Redan's got walls that are 17 feet high with a ditch about 6 feet deep in front of it. The battlements themselves are almost a dozen feet wide with a firing platform, so the Confederates have a good, strong position. And these men are going to come charging out of here, 150 of them, across this distance. We'll see here that on either side of us, we've got a ravine that drops off on either side. This is where they were assaulting the day before, or a couple days before, excuse me. But as the men get into this open area, they start getting shot down, and they start to litter the ground. In fact, of those 150 men, slightly more than a third of them are going to end up as casualties, either killed or wounded as a result of this. But then, as they get up, and some of them actually get to the Redan itself, they get their ladders down, they get those bridges built, and now Ewing's column has got to come out and make this assault. Leading the way for him is going to be the 30th Ohio. And as they get out into this area, they start taking heavy fire. And so they're going to litter this road. Now again, I can't stress enough, we got a bottleneck here because of this ravine. So with all of these casualties scattered on this road, the 2nd Regiment that comes out, the 37th Ohio, excuse me, they see this bottleneck, the scatter of bodies across this road, and they take to ground. They don't advance. And as a result, it creates a complete bottleneck of that little road cut. So the 47th Ohio is coming next. They can't get through, so they're going to deploy on the hillside off to my left on the far side of that ravine. They're going to be followed by the 4th West Virginia. They're going to extend the line in that direction. So Ewing's got all 4 of his regiments deployed. They're stretched out. Now imagine as those guys get across this road, and instead of staying on the road, which then takes them straight across the face of the Redan and the face across Confederate fire, they're going to try to charge up here. So they build those bridges across here real quick, slapdash, get some ladders down. In fact, one Ohioan gets all the way to the top and plants his flag. Confederates try on several occasions to capture it from him, and they don't. But because of the way that this bottleneck has happened behind the camera in front of me, and these men are trapped on the face of the Redan, they're now stuck between Confederates firing in that direction and the rest of Ewing's brigade firing in this direction. And so it's kind of the worst place to be. They're trapped and they can't run the gauntlet. And so they're going to stay there throughout the day, taking pot shots, accepting pot shots. Confederates are actually going to roll cannonballs down and try to blow guys up by hand. Some of the guys that are trapped on the face of this Redan will catch those and throw them back up over. And they're going to have to wait this out. The fight itself lasts only about 2 hours. Cockrell himself calls it a desperate and prolonged assault, a prolonged effort to take our works by assault. But that assault lasts only about 2 hours, but these guys are going to be trapped here in that skirmishing and won't be able to withdraw until night. I want to bring in my friend Chris White here to add some cool stories to this.
Thanks, Chris. One of the things I want to do is just step over here for a minute. The idea of siege warfare is to try to get as close as humanly possible to the enemy lines. So you might start at a distance, but what you need to do is cut parallels, which will get closer. 1 parallel, 2, 3, and every step, think of it as going up a ladder, you'll get kind of closer to that enemy. Always watching for fire ants. So as we get closer and closer, we have to find different ways and innovations to do that. So we'll cut approach lines as well. And these are usually in a zigzag manner because you don't want to shoot straight down or give the enemy the opportunity to shoot straight down a line, which is easy to do. So you zig and you zag your lines and you're creating these deep cuts in the earth. And up in this area of where we're standing near Stockade Redan coming out, what I like is that we have all of these blue War Department signs, tons of them. If you start to read Ewing's approach, Ewing's approach, Ewing's approach, what you're starting to see though is the length of this siege, because the signs that we start to see, we'll talk about these assaults that Chris was talking about. But if we flip around over here, we'll see one that talks about Ewing's approach and the end of the main gallery from Ewing's approach. What we're seeing here is a mining operation that's also taking place. The failure to take this position means we need to find an innovative way to do to assault this position. What's another innovative way to do that? That is digging a mine, putting in here what they're calling about the gallery, the main gallery, which is simply a big room under earth, packing that full of 2,200 plus pounds of gunpowder, and then exploding the thing. So that's what we start to see coming out here in these different areas. So it's a crazy idea, you would think, but this goes back into ancient times. I just want to point out we've come into the Stockade Redan on the Graveyard Road. We've changed from blue signs of Hugh Ewing's division, Hugh Ewing's men coming into here, now to red signs talking about some of the Arkansas, the Missourians, down the road, the Mississippians and Tennessee boys who are defending this area. So we're seeing that transition. And if you want to know how close that last tablet I pointed out to you was, here where we're standing is right here, just over top of that earth, over top of the parapet, is that one saying there's going to be 2,200 pounds of black powder underneath this position.
Alrighty, that's a little more detail about the Stockade Redan complex. We're going to continue on around Union Avenue as far as we can go. As we said, Vicksburg has experienced a whole lot of erosion and road troubles and so on, particularly along the northern part of Union Avenue across Mint Spring Bayou. Which coming up on the left here, you will start to see kind of some of the headwaters actually of Mint Spring Bayou, these deep ravines and so on. So some of that is shut down, but we're going to show you as much of the park as possible. Here again, we're in Sherman's 15th Corps. You're getting into the 57th Ohio, Kilby Smith's Brigade, later Lightburn's Brigade, Indiana Regiment. 54th Ohio, that Zouave Regiment, that was the one that held the critical left flank at Shiloh, Stewart's Brigade. And here you're seeing some Illinois monuments. Up here on the left is the tour route that will go basically on the north side of Mint Spring Bayou and come out at the Cairo down there. So that's the part that you're missing and is not accessible. There's a little loop you go back and forth back in here before you go that direction, and so we're just going to kind of quickly head back in here. A couple of major things to see. 58th Ohio, 25th Wisconsin, There's an area back in here that just kind of has a bunch of monuments to units that were not here in the siege proper, but were maybe back on the back line, the one holding the back door, if you will, to make sure that Joseph E. Johnston doesn't come and relieve Vicksburg or lift the siege, which I don't think there was any concern about. There was concern, but I don't think there was any need to be concerned over that. At any rate, this is an area that you get some of those monuments. You also get up here, which is very interesting, more recently, and this is a sign of the times of more inclusive interpretation and so on. Probably 10, 15 years ago, there was an African-American monument put up to the U.S.S troops that were involved in the Vicksburg Campaign, not in the siege proper or the assaults, but certainly elsewhere in the Vicksburg Campaign, most notably at the Battle of Milliken's Bend across the river in Louisiana in early June, as the Confederates try to do something over there. So here you're seeing more of these busts on the left. This is as far as we can go. If you went on down this road, you would come to, of course, Grant's headquarters, a beautiful equestrian monument of Grant back there. But unfortunately, they're having some major road issues. So we're going to turn around here. So here you're getting the other side of the view of these monuments and so on that go up back here, and another view of the USCT monument. We're going to take a right up here and also go back and make just a very short loop. There's the Kansas monument, or if you've got a view of that. Very few Kansas troops here, but there were Kansas troops here, so they get a monument. Sherman's headquarters are also back in this area. We pretty much wherever you find Grant, you're going to find Sherman nearby. They're buddies. They work together. And of course, Grant's going to have his headquarters up on this kind of northern section. And if he has to spend more time with any of his corps commanders, it's going to be Sherman or McPherson rather than McClernand, who he doesn't necessarily get along with, and will actually relieve during the middle of the siege on June the 19th. Basically for, here's where we're going to take this right, turn our blinker on, and go back into Sherman Circle. McClernand unwisely publishes a report in the newspapers before he gets clearance from Grant or the War Department, which is a no-no. That's against regulations, which is it's a small something, normally wouldn't warrant the relief of a corps commander. But Grant at this point is just looking for something, and McClernand has been causing some issues all throughout the campaign, and Grant has the authority to relieve him. And in fact, one observer said this was the occasion, not the cause, for McClernand's relief. And he will be replaced by a new Corps commander of the 13th Corps, E.O.C. Ord. And we'll see more of the 13th Corps a little bit later on. But this is Sherman's headquarters, his headquarters circle, high ground right here on the left. And you also see, of course, some of these monuments to these units that were not on the Vicksburg siege lines proper, but were nevertheless involved in the campaign or the background. That Iowa monument was to a 16th Corps Iowa unit, which the 16th Corps, normally up in West Tennessee under Stephen A. Hurlbut, but many of those, actually 3 divisions of that Corps, are called down as reinforcements, and the vast majority, except for Jacob Lawman's division of the 16th Corps, which goes on line to the south end down there, will actually be on the back end of the line here. So we're going back the same way that we came. We're going to come right back out at the Stockade Redan where we made the stop, and get a little view kind of what we saw earlier on foot. Just get it, from the vehicle here, which we won't go into detail as we move across, but you can imagine yourself on the 22nd, the lead attack here against the Stockade Redan is by what was called the Forlorn Hope. And so you can imagine yourself kind of trotting down this road and through this road cut up here and coming out into heavy Confederate fire. Can't imagine what was going through those guys' minds. This is one of the 6 major roads into Vicksburg, of course. This is the Graveyard Road. If you continued on, you can't continue on today, but if you continued on into Vicksburg, it will pass the city's cemetery. And us Southerners down here, we refer to cemeteries about half the time as graveyards. So this becomes known as the Graveyard Road. And of course, all these tablets and so on that we talked about just a little bit earlier. Now, the Stockade Redan complex, as I said, will involve more than just the Stockade Redan just to our left here. It will include the 27th Louisiana Lunette to our right. We're going to go that direction on Confederate Avenue, as well as Green's Redan to our left. We'll come back and see that in just a little bit. So we're on new territory here. The northern face, the left flank of the Stockade Redan complex will be the 26th, 27th Louisiana here, in a lunette that will defend kind of this salient. The reason there's such a big complex there is because it's a salient in the line where it turns 90 degrees. And so you need a lot of fortifications and defenses there. So we're on the Confederate lines as you see the red tablets here. And the reason we have to do that, of course, obviously, is two-way here. Normally this would just be one way, but we have to do that, of course, because the way to get down in here on the Union lines is closed because of erosion. So we have to kind of do this all along the Confederate lines rather than the way we've been doing it all along. So we have a biker here. Again, you can see the various reliefs and portraits and so on. So we're on the Confederate lines facing northward across Mint Spring Bayou. This is called Thayer's Approach, and I wish maybe we get a little better view when we come back. We've got to come back this way as well, but very, very steep declivity here that the Union forces will A, charge up on May the 22nd, but also B, dig up through the rest of the siege. There is actually an approach there that the brigade commander, John A. Thayer, later governor of Nebraska, originally colonel of the 1st Nebraska, will lead an approach there against the Confederate lines. It's never breached by assault. The Confederate lines hold there on the 22nd, and the approach only reaches the lines toward the end of the siege there. So this is one of the more defensible areas of the Confederate siege lines, mainly because Mint Spring Bayou, just to our right, very, very deep, very steep. In fact, the Confederate commanders will place the most circumspect Confederates here on the most defensible lines. For instance, Vaughn's brigade that had broken at Big Back River Bridge, those East Tennessee conscripts, they will be placed up here because there's probably not going to be an attack here, and so we'll basically put the weakest troops on the strongest position so they won't have to, face an attack. Now, before all you Tennesseans, I live in Tennessee, get mad at me, Mississippians, I'm a Mississippian, but some of the Mississippi State troops are also put on this position up here because that's not the best troops that Pemberton has. There's a great story of these Mississippi State troops. They don't have many shovels, but as they're told to start digging their trenches, they start digging and they dig and they dig and they dig, and ultimately they finally dig way overhead height, and so there's no way they can see out of their trenches. And one officer comes along and says, well, you probably want to fill that in a little bit so you can see out of it, or else you're going to get down so far that you're going to be hotter closer to the center of the earth than you will be under federal fire. So fill that in just a little bit. So the obvious thing was they didn't know what they were doing, and not the best troops. Tennessee State Monument, again dealing with Vaughn's brigade that is positioned in this general area. And if you get a glimpse every once in a while to the right, this is really good view sheds and so on. You can see what a major ravine Mint Spring Bayou is in. But you can also see the Union line over there, and you may have gotten a glimpse of the naval monument, the obelisk over there, which you normally see on the Union tour route, the upper part that's closed. You can see that on that part of the tour route when it will be hopefully reopened. There's the monument over there. I don't know if you could see it out of the cameras or not. But anyway, Mississippi Regiments, 5th Mississippi Infantry State Troops, various Mississippi monuments here on the extreme left of the Confederate lines, which would come to one of the major fortifications, one of the 9 major fortifications, Fort Hill. Now, it was not necessarily known, that's the Union name of it later after the siege. There was a fort here after the siege. What everybody referred to as Fort Hill was actually the 3rd Louisiana Redan, back on the Jackson Road. But this is a really great area. Let me kind of park here a little bit to see if I can get you a little view of the river down here. This is very flooded now. You can see a tugboat going down there. This is the bend that Porter makes this run through. The Mississippi River changes course in 1876 and cuts through exactly where Grant had wanted it to cut through with the canal that he was digging. But that only comes, a decade later. So what was river then is not river now, and this big bend, kind of, you can see it where those barges are and so on up there. That's the bend of the river, that horseshoe pin, very tight bend that Admiral Porter makes his run around on the night of April the 16th, and then the transports on the 22nd, trying to get past Vicksburg's battery. So this was Mississippi River in 1863, no longer the Mississippi River, and that's why you have a fortification here on the high ground. Of course, the major Confederate guns that will cause the problems for the Union Navy, however, are down a little lower. This is too high to de-elevate your guns and to shoot on the river there. So you put the guns a little bit lower, and the famed water battery that does all the damage and actually sinks one of the Union gunboats up here will actually be farther down, a little closer to the river there. So we're going to back out here and head down to one of the most unique sites on any national park, and that is a Civil War era gunboat. Not everybody has a gunboat. Not even Gettysburg has a gunboat. So, as we make these turns and so on, you'll get a lot better view of these view sheds and so on. Of course, as we go down, it'll be not quite as dramatic, but this is one of those areas that the park, where the park is able to close off access at the end of the day, and you see a fee station there. Okay, that road, if you went left, you would go back into downtown Vicksburg. If you look to the left here, you can see one gun. You see the water battery down there, and so that is, and you see the highway, the main highway down there, going north out of Vicksburg. All right, we will cross Mint Spring Bayou right up here. We're going down into the valley, and it's Mint Spring Bayou on the north end of the siege lines that separates the Confederate lines on the ridge south of Mint Spring Bayou and the Union lines on the ridge north of Mint Spring Bayou. And so as we cross over, this is the bayou right here, flowing into the Mississippi River to our left, of course. And just on the high ground up here, you will begin to see the Vicksburg National Cemetery, which there's some 18,000 or so graves here, the vast majority of them Civil War. You'll see the old cemetery caretaker's house, cemetery superintendent's house. And then, of course, we are approaching the U.S.S. Cairo. And this is such a significant site that we're also going to stop here and get out and give you a little more detail on the Cairo. So let's find a parking place and we will talk in more detail about this famed gunboat. All right, we have made our stop at the U.S.S. Cairo Museum here at Vicksburg National Military Park. And this is really a unique feature of this park. Not many national parks have a Civil War gunboat that you can board and see the remnants of. And the reason that this is even here is because it was sunk on December 12th, 1862 in the Yazoo River, just north of the national park here. And it stayed in the river, bottom of the river, for 100 years, and in the 1960s was actually raised. And you've probably heard the story about Ed Bars and some friends and so on finding it and ultimately raising it. It's pretty well preserved, a lot of it, particularly the hull and so on. It's an amazing feature here. But one of the things I want to show you right here, it was sunk because it hit what they called then a torpedo. Now, we think of torpedoes as shot out of submarines, you know, and sinks a ship and so on. Really what we would consider a mine today. It hit two mines, water mines, and blew a huge hole in the front end. In fact, if you look, you can see where the mines hit. You can see the dark wood, of course, is the original, and the iron plating and so on. But there's not a lot left right there on the port bow. And that's where the mines hit and blew a gaping hole in it and went down in about 12 minutes. Didn't take long. Fortunately, there was no loss of life. There were some injuries, there were some wounded, but there was no loss of life, and it was well preserved then in the bottom of the Yazoo River for all those years. There's another, the St. Louis, later known as the Baron de Kalb, was sunk later on in the war farther up the Yazoo River around Yazoo City, and it's still there. It's in the bottom of either the Yazoo or maybe I think the channel turned, so it's probably in the bottom of a field or a slough or a bayou now, but it's actually still there. Nobody's ever found it to my knowledge, and certainly not raised it. Let's walk on down a little bit and we'll go on board. The cannons are all the original guns. The carriages, I believe, are not. They have one of the original carriages inside the visitor center here, and a lot of the artifacts and so on, the ship's bell, for instance, will be inside the museum. And I like the way they did, you know, kind of the museum there with the sloping sides and so on, that kind of, you know, makes it using the motif, like at the visitor center of the earthworks, kind of uses the motif of the sloping sides and so on. Here you can see, of course, some of the original decking and timbers and so on, the original engines, the original paddle wheel. When they brought this paddle wheel up, there are pictures of it. I don't see it on the wayside here, but this thing was all crinkled and just, you know, crunched together and so on. And it was straightened out and put on display here. Of course, you can see the guns, you can see the boilers, the steam drum, all of that, and the holds below. So really a fascinating exhibit here. You can see down below a lot of the original timbers and so on. And we're on the gun deck, of course, and you can see the three bow guns that are protected with the iron plating. And these ships are boats, not ships. They're intended to fight bow forward, so they're heavily armored up there. You see the steam capstan here that's used to pull in ropes and so on. Up above, you see the pilot house. Originally, these had wooden square pilot houses, and they figured out we better armor this stuff, so it's sloping sides of the armor as well. That was actually the first thing that was brought up in the early 1860s or the 1960s, and then of course they went to bring the entire vessel up. So really a cool artifact here from from the Vicksburg Campaign. And you can just imagine, you know, the sailors working on the gun deck here and the deck below, and shoveling coal into the furnace here and the boilers and so on. It's in the uptakes, the smokestacks. Just a really cool artifact. And you can see it if you come and visit in person. All right, we're going to head back to the vehicle and continue our tour on around the Confederate siege lines. Back in the vehicle now. That it really is truly one of the remarkable sights in any national park. Here you're getting more views of the Vicksburg National Cemetery. Very, very beautiful cemetery, of course. Most of them out there are unknown. You see the small square stones; those denote unknown soldiers. The vast majority of these are buried, of course, on the battlefields for 4 or 5 years before they're disinterred and brought to the National Cemetery. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of identities obviously will be lost in those intervening years, and so they were unknown when brought to the National Cemetery. Fortunately, some of them are known. So we're retracing our route. In fact, what we're going to do is retrace the entire route we just came all the way back to the Stockade Redan along the Confederate lines. Again, because of the erosion and the problems with the tour route and so on, that's the only option we've got. So we have to go back in and kind of double up a little bit and retrace our steps. But we'll see everything a little bit from a different viewpoint there. Again, Fort Hill on our left is very steep. There's a lot of erosion problems with that as well, and you can see now, or you may have seen, it was terraced. I can remember coming here as a kid, and at some points even Fort Hill would have been closed down because of the erosion problems. Vicksburg has, and you've probably heard, one of the defining features of the soil here is this low-A soil, which is very fine silt, fine-grained soil that is very, very easy to dig, and it very much holds its form once dug, and as a result, you don't need a lot of shoring up in these mines, for instance, these galleries that they dig underground. You don't need a whole lot of shoring when you dig a trench or a approach or something. You don't need to shore it up for fear of it falling. Now, several cannonballs hit it and explode and so on. That's going to loosen the soil and obviously and cause it to erode a little bit more. But by and large, a lot of people compared it then to cutting cheese. You know, you cut a block of cheese and it's going to retain its form and so on very, very nicely. So the problem is with that type of soil, it is very easy to erode. Once it does start eroding, then you have very unstable soil and it causes some problems. As we're retracing our route here, we can maybe go into a little bit more detail about this soil and so on. It's interesting, one of the ways that the Confederates at the 3rd Louisiana Redan or some of these other mines that are dug in the various fortifications that were never blown up, the only two that are ever blown are at 3rd Louisiana Redan. But the way the Confederates try to counteract this is in actually 2 or 3 different ways. Number one, they would sink counter mines in order to try, you know, if you dug into their mine, the enemy's mine, then you could have a little battle there underground. You know, we talk about the battle above the clouds. You could have a battle underground for, you know, 3 or 4 people. The bigger hope of that, though, would be in a gallery that you sink, would be to take the pressure of when the enemy mine does go off, maybe that would be a vent that the pressure would go up and not blow your fort up. Maybe it's like a pressure cooker, you know, with a vent at the top. If all the pressure goes up at the top, then it won't do as much damage on the other side. So that's one way that you combat these mines and so on that the Federals are digging. The other major way that you do it is that you sink your counter mines and you dig your own galleries and you plant your own charges, very much smaller charges, out toward kind of where you think they are. It's amazing to hear their accounts. Underground, apparently you can hear conversations. You can hear people talking. It's almost like underwater, you know, you can hear things underwater and sound waves and all of that. It's very different underground. And they could tell that they're Federals out there digging, and you could tell most of the time how far you were away, but you couldn't always tell exactly whether they were above you or below you or to maybe which side of you. So it's very difficult to pinpoint and find exactly where they were. Now here we've got a car coming, but we'll try to get you. We just simply don't have time to see everything, but I'm not sure out to the left whether you can see some of the terrain here. We'll try to. We've got some shots that we'll put up on the screen here, but it's a really neat place. And remember this, it was the Civil War Trust then, or heck, it might have been the Civil War Preservation Trust. Came many years ago, and they wanted me to lead a heavy walking tour, heavy hiking tour. And I said, we can do heavy up Thayer's Approach there. So that thing's almost straight up like that. And we came up it. We went across Stockade Redan and so on. So really, really interesting place there, cool place. Getting back to the mines, the reason that you blow much smaller mines on the Confederate side is to basically loosen the dirt. If you blow a little bitty mine, you don't have to blow the thing up, but blow a little bitty mine, you can loosen the dirt so much that the enemy mines, the Federal mines, will collapse and won't hold their form and so on. So that's another way that the Confederates will sometimes combat these mining operations. We're back at the Stockade Redan. There are mines dug under the Stockade Redan. But the siege ends, of course, before those are ever blown. Held on the 19th and the 22nd of May by a couple of Missouri regiments along on the east face with the 36th Mississippi. You see a couple of monuments here, Colonel Witherspoon of the 36th Mississippi. As you continue down, we will get to Green's Redan, which was held later in the siege. There's some movement of the brigades and so on. But Green's Missouri and Arkansas Brigade will actually take position here later in the siege and be known as Green's Redan. And it is here actually that Greene pokes his head up above the siege lines and says, you know, the bullet hadn't been made that can hurt me yet. And right about that time, he takes a bullet in his head. It's almost like, who was it, Sedgwick at Spotsylvania. They couldn't hit an elephant from here, but they can hit a general. Arkansas State Monument, we won't say much about it. It's a little more modern. But as we continue along then, all this is new now. We're back off the path that where we're retracing their steps. This is new along the Confederate lines. We came across just to our left on the opposite ridge in Sherman's Corps and Ransom's Brigade to the north of Glass Bayou. And so we're seeing the Confederate position that is defending those assaults and approaches from Ransom's Brigade, Giles Smith's Brigade, Kilby Smith's Brigade, and so on, Blair's division there of the 15th Corps. So what we're doing, we're going back down into Glass Bayou. We'll cross it just to the west of where we crossed it earlier. And again, you can't really tell it at this point, but extremely rugged terrain down in there. And you know, that's what is so good about clear cutting back at the Illinois Monument, the Shirley House, if all this was clear cut, we'd get a whole lot better view of just how substantial this terrain is and how much difficulty the Federals had trying to get across all this. So coming out of Glass Bayou, we will come back to the operations area. That's been Martin L. Smith's division of the Confederate Army. We're getting into John Forney's position here, Division Commander John H. Forney, and that will be Moore's Brigade. That will Hebert's Brigade, Moore's Brigade, that will hold the 3rd Louisiana Redan, which we were just at a little bit earlier. We got out, that we're on the back side of that. And so we're crossing basically the Jackson Road right now. If we took this little route right here, which we're not going to do because it says service road or official use only, do not enter. But if we took that road, this is the Jackson Road, and this is where, of course, those 2 major Confederate fortifications are holding that. The 3rd Louisiana Redan right back there, and then just ahead of us right here is where you see the tall Louisiana monument, the Louisiana, or the Great Redoubt. This is the 3rd Louisiana Redan. To our left, that's the Great Redoubt. And there's actually an assault, if you can see to the right out here, all those tablets and so on, there's an assault by John D. Stevenson's brigade of McPherson's Corps, Logan's division, on the 22nd across these hills, and those are a lot steeper hills than the camera doesn't do justice. Those are some steep hills. I climbed that hill one time and I was bad out of breath. But they make an assault against the Great Redoubt there. Now, the reason to come down into here, we make just a little bit of a side right here. This cannon tube pointing skyward here is actually the interview site between Grant and Pemberton on July the 3rd. This is between the lines. Tell you what we're going to do. We're going to go down here and we're going to make a loop and come back and get you another view of that. If we went on straight, we would just get back into the Union Avenue lines and basically make the loop again. This is the old park superintendent's residence, basically the first visitor center here, and this dates back, I believe, to the 1930s. And then in the 1960s, of course, with the Mission 66 visitor centers and so on, you have the new visitor center that is at its current location. But from here, you see the Great Redoubt, the Louisiana Monument there. But also to the right, you'll see the interview site that has the cannon there marking the position. Grant and Pemberton meet together on July the 3rd and begin the process of negotiating capitulation. It is only, of course, by the next morning that they actually get this accomplished, and the Confederates will stack arms, march in front of their fortifications, stack arms at 10 o'clock on the morning of July the 4th. Now, originally there was a marble obelisk at that site, and it was so damaged, people wanting, remnants of it and souvenirs and so on, that they had to take it down and replace it with a cannon. It's hard to take souvenirs off of a cannon like that. But that the original marble or stone monument is actually in the Vicksburg National Military Park Visitor Center now, so you can go in the Visitor Center and see that. All right, this is the Great Redoubt, again attacked by Stevenson's brigade on May the 22nd, unsuccessfully. The Federals, as they do to almost all these major fortifications, get to the ditch in front of the parapet, but cannot break the Confederate lines, and as a result have to fall back, and then they begin siege operations. There are no approaches to the Great Redoubt. The approaches on Logan's division line come along the Jackson Road. Logan's approach toward the 3rd Louisiana Redan. We'll just whip in here real quick. This is a monument to one of the campaign battles. If you can see there, this is Lloyd Tillman being killed at the Battle of Champion Hill, which was on the 16th before the Federals enveloped Vicksburg on the 18th and then start their attacks on the 19th. He was hit in the chest by a cannonball. Looks a little melodramatic to me. If I was hit in the chest by a cannonball, I'm not sure I would be, you know, doing that necessarily. I'm not sure. It's a wonderful monument, very, very beautiful, but I'm not sure how accurate it is, but then I wasn't there, and I don't know what he did when he got hit by a cannonball. So at any rate, that is a nod to other campaign actions rather than just the assaults and just the siege of Vicksburg. Fortunately, through the efforts of the American Battlefield Trust and others, the state of Mississippi, the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, a lot of the land out in the campaign proper at Port Gibson, at Raymond, Friends of Raymond, at Champion Hill, Big Black River Bridge. A lot of that is being saved, and I think even turned over to the Park Service. The park itself is growing with these outlying features, and fortunately, a lot of that is being preserved, and the American Battlefield Trust is really doing a good job down here in Mississippi. That was a statue, I don't know if you saw it or not, of John Forney, the division commander in this area. We're continuing along, obviously, the Confederate lines. Now, between the two major fortifications on the Jackson Road and the next road down, the Baldwin's Ferry Road, here's the Mississippi Monument. I don't know if you can get a view of that. Very, very beautiful monument put up, I believe, I'd have to check on this, maybe 1909. But a lot of Mississippians here, of course, and it's fitting that Mississippi has a monument here to its troops. But the Confederate lines would run from the Jackson Road southward to the Baldwin's Ferry Road. And it is here, of course, that we get the next major fortifications on down, not right here, and that'll be the 2nd Texas Lunette. This is a statue you get several statues down in here. That is John C. Pemberton himself, the Confederate commander who is a Pennsylvanian by birth. We have several Civil War commanders that you know, go opposite than their original states and so on. You think of George Thomas, who was a Virginian but stayed loyal to the Union. John Pemberton is a Pennsylvanian, has brothers in the Union Army, and winds up as a Confederate general. He had married a Southern gal, Southern belle, and she leaned pretty heavily on him, I think, to go with the South. So he wound up, a lot of people questioned his loyalty. In fact, a lot of the letters and diaries from the soldiers themselves, that is a big dog. We'll talk about, you know, he's a traitor. He sold Vicksburg and all of that. I don't think there's any doubt that he was completely loyal to the Confederacy. In fact, after Vicksburg, he's a lieutenant general, but there's no billet for a lieutenant general. They don't need another one, and he's, you know, persona non grata kind of. So he actually resigns and becomes a lieutenant colonel of artillery and fights the rest of the war as a lieutenant colonel in the Confederate Army. Here's a statue of Jefferson Davis with his beloved Confederate flag. He, of course, is a Kentuckian by birth, but a Mississippian by transplant, and in fact his plantation just south of Vicksburg, Briarfield, will be of major interest to the Federals as they operate along the river and get down into this area. He owns several other plantations. In fact, as Sherman is moving from Jackson to Vicksburg, he comes across a plantation, and there are books scattered around. Obviously, somebody's been there looted before, and he tells the soldier, reach down there and hand me that book, and it's a copy of the Constitution, and inscribed on the front of it is Jefferson Davis, and he finds out he's on Jefferson Davis's, one of his many plantations. Okay, here you're starting to see a whole lot of blue markers right up by a bunch of red markers. You can't really see the red markers, but right off to the right up here, I don't know if you can see it, this is a cemetery. This is a Jewish cemetery. This is not park land, but it just so happens that the 2nd Texas Lunette actually sat right up in the middle of that cemetery. So where the actual site of the 2nd Texas Lunette was is not parkland today. It's a cemetery, and the Federals would both assault on May the 22nd, as well as approach. There are a couple of approaches that head toward the 2nd Texas Lunette, and in fact, the only general officer in the Union Army to die here at the siege of Vicksburg, or the assaults, is George Boomer, who was killed just around the corner here, attacking the 2nd Texas Lunette on May the 22nd. Now, the Visitor Center is just to our left here. We're going to go around what is called the South Loop. This is Clay Street, the main thoroughfare into downtown Vicksburg and so on. So to kind of get across it, you have to go under this bridge, so they want to make it, you know, as one way as possible. So this is kind of a whole new loop out here on this south end, and basically what we're entering is the area, and we're already in it a little bit with A.J. Smith's attacks and assaults and approaches on the 2nd Texas Lunette, but we're entering the 13th Army Corps area of John A. McClernand. In fact, you'll start to see some tablets up here denoting some assaults as well as approaches. This one right here on the side of the railroad, I don't know if you can see it or not, it talks about Carr's approach, beginning of Carr's right approach. Carr had 2 approaches against the Railroad Redoubt, cut immediately through the railroad. Now, we're crossing right here the Southern Railroad of Mississippi. This is the one that ran from Meridian to Jackson, all the way to Vicksburg and into Vicksburg, of course. And as a result, the Confederates will put up fortifications to defend that route as well. And of course, they really use some imaginary terminology and call it the Railroad Redoubt, which, you know, seems logical. So up on top of the hill up there is the Railroad Redoubt. The Union forces will be back on the ridge to our rear. We had to come around to make this loop. We'll see that as we come back around. But getting down into this valley here, again, you can see this is open area, fortunately, and you can see some pretty rugged terrain. You can also see some remnants of some of the approaches, Carr's approaches, as they reach this area toward the Railroad Redoubt. On the 22nd, when Michael Lawler's brigade attacks the Railroad Redoubt, they will actually move under cover of darkness to a point right in this area that they could still be shielded and not seen by the Confederates, and then when the assault comes, just leap right up and head right into the Railroad Redoubt. And in fact, although McClernand tells Grant, hey, I've had some success, my flag flies over the Railroad Redoubt, it's not that much success, but if there is any success in the May 22nd assaults, it is here at the Railroad Redoubt. Now this causes McClernand, this is part of the problem between Grant and McClernand, building problem. McClernand tells Grant, hey, I want you to restart the assaults on the 17th Corps and the 15th Corps, Sherman and McPherson, to give me some aid and send me reinforcements. And basically, Grant will hesitatingly do that because he thinks McClernand has had some success. Unfortunately, McClernand has not had much success at all. The reinforcements and the renewal of the assaults don't do anything except produce more casualties, and Grant gets really irritated at McClernand because of this, and it helps lead to his removal a little bit later on. Of course, here is the 2nd Texas Monument, the 2nd Texas, or not the 2nd Texas, but the overall Texas Monument. 2nd Texas, across the railroad, Wall's Texas Legion will be instrumental here in retaking the very tip of the Railroad Redoubt and so on.
Now you can see we're overlooking the railroad. That was a railroad during the Civil War. That's why this is called the Railroad Redoubt. And that railroad connected Vicksburg with Jackson, and from Jackson to points throughout the Confederacy. This is the railroad that you could access at Vicksburg. This is one of the things that made Vicksburg the key. It's high bluffs and this railroad that could feed the Confederacy. Even if goods came from the Western Confederacy or the Trans-Mississippi in on the Red River, they could, because they control that part of the river, they could move up to Vicksburg and then by rail feed the rest of the Confederacy. And the Southerners knew this was important. that's why they're going to construct this big redoubt here. Remember, you've got the Stockade Redan guarding the Graveyard Road, you've got the Great Redoubt and the 3rd Louisiana Redan guarding the Jackson Road. Well, here you have this impressive fortification. It's a large one. It might be one of the largest ones here at the Vicksburg National Military Park, guarding this critical railroad over here. Now, during the attacks on Vicksburg, this area didn't see fighting on the May 19th attacks, but on May 22nd, 1863, you have McClernand's troops over there, A.J. Smith's division and some other people off in the distance, but most specifically Lawler's brigade and Landrum's brigade, and they are right across the way. You're probably looking toward the Iowa Monument now. There's a lot of Iowans in those brigades as well, but you've also got Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois, and other troops as well composing the attacking force. Mainly, you've got Landrum and Lawler coming in this direction here. Now, before they're going to come and attack across this field here, there's going to be a huge bombardment, and this fort will be pummeled for a couple of hours by McClernand's guns here, okay? To the point where the tip of this redoubt actually caves into the ditch, and it's going to provide an opportunity for some of these Union soldiers. The Confederates don't really have a good way to man that area there. Now, while I'm talking about it, if you look at that impressive Iowa monument, I think it's 1905 or 1906, and if you look at the woods right behind it, the members of the American Battlefield Trust, were able to help us preserve that land back there. And if it hasn't been, it will soon be transferred to the Vicksburg National Military Park. And that was the camp of the 22nd Iowa, who's going to be involved in this attack right here. So it's not only a camp, but there's casualties back there, probably an aid station as well. So the guns fall silent. Here comes the Union attack, from all those states and whatnot, and the Union is able to get across that terrible terrain you see here and access the side of this redoubt. A dozen of the Iowa boys, I think they're in the 22nd, are going to go into the ditch and lead some men into the redoubt, and they alone. After the Confederates have suffered so many casualties in the bombardment, you got an Alabama battery and a Mississippi battery suffering significant casualties. The Confederate defenders leave. So these Iowans pour in, but McClernand has been conducting a larger attack. His force has been used up. He has no reinforcements. He scribbles a note to Grant. The Stars and Stripes wave over the Great Redoubt. The Railroad Redoubt. We need reinforcements. Grant had nobody to send, but he did keep up his attacks to try to provide an opportunity for McClernand. The Confederates are short on reinforcements at this point, but luckily for them, here comes the Texans. Wall's Texas Legion, the only Texans actually serving in the fighting at Vicksburg, come charging across this area right over here and pitch into the Iowans. The Iowa and Illinois troops who were fanning out and getting behind the redoubt over here, they're able to push them back, and these men are running out of ammunition, and the Union troops will dejectedly, after such a chance for success here, maybe the best chance for success during the attack on May 22nd, fall back to their lines after suffering heavy casualties. At the entire siege, the Iowans alone suffered 1,800 casualties here. Now, as we walk, I mentioned McClernand. What? McClernand? McClernand launched this attack. His troops did the best. Well, if you start to look at him, he did some of the most dangerous missions on the Vicksburg Campaign. Sorry, that's Chris pointing to me about all these. Look at these anthills behind me.
Dangerous
Oh my
mission.
God, I was about to, so thank you, Chris. So McClernand is one of the better performing corps commanders at this battle and siege there. I said it. And let me turn it over to Chris Mackowski, Emerging Civil War and Copey Hill American Battlefield Trust Fellow.
Thanks so much, Garry. And it is pretty incredible because McClernand is one of those guys, he's tough to love. And nobody in this army particularly loved him. William T. Sherman called him my demon spirit. He loathed McClernand. But McClernand does all of the heavy lifting through the most of the interior campaign here. He's the first person to cross the river and establish the beachhead. He essentially wins the Battle of Port Gibson single-handedly. He is going to stay between Grant's moving columns as they march into the interior of the state. He's going to stay between the columns and the rest of the army, so he'll always be on Grant's left flank. And Grant and his three corps move sort of like a three-legged stool. And McClernand's always the one that's between Grant and the Confederates. When they get to the Battle of Jackson, he's going to be guarding the rest of the army, but then he's going to then lead the vanguard of the army as it goes to Champion Hill. He's going to do most of the fighting there. He's going to have the victory at the Big Black River. And so when he gets here to the outskirts of Vicksburg, he's had success after success after success. When he sees the 77th Illinois and the 22nd Iowa plant their flags on the front of this fortification, that's going to be his signal to say, hey, I've got a lodgment, I need help. And as a result of that, he's going to then ask for reinforcements to help with his lodgment here. The other two corps commanders, after this is all over, will really poo-poo him, but McClernand is actually going to pat himself on the back. And on May 30th, he's going to issue General Order 72 that's going to talk about how the successes of his men and how great they were and how they're the ones who have led the way in this whole campaign. And that's going to find its way into the newspapers, and it's going to violate an order that Grant had issued. Grant's been looking for an excuse to fire McClernand, and basically his breakthrough here is going to provide that, because McClernand writes about it, it shows up in the paper, and Grant finally has an excuse to say, you're fired.
And, and that says a lot about humanity. We like to look at these people in 2 dimensions, but when you expand them out to 3, think about it. Have you ever met somebody who's really capable at what they do, but you just don't like? Okay, some people are hard to like, and when they're hard to like, you don't exactly want to help them. Maybe you should, because they're really capable at what they do. And I sort of think that increasingly McClernand is emerging as maybe a difficult person, but somebody who is more capable of an officer, at least in the middle of 1863, than he's maybe portrayed. Now, 2 more things I want to do before we close. One, we're standing at the largest Texas monument outside the state of Texas. That's red Texas granite, of course, or pink Texas granite, as many people call it. Dedicated in 1961. You've got the Texas soldier there here on the site where Wall's Texas Legion came through and sort of saved the day for the Confederates. You can see yucca plants at the base, sort of bringing Texas here into Mississippi. You can see the 11 steps representing the 11 states. Represented in the Confederacy at that time, although people like to argue about the number of Confederate states sometimes, don't they? Lastly, off in the distance there, where Wall's men came from and way off to the left, is yet another spot that you, the members of the organization and supporters, have helped us to preserve and add to this park. So you're basically looking at everything in those woods there. It's a sizable tract. It will be transferred over to the Vicksburg National Military Park. So in this case, at a battlefield that was preserved early, and we haven't been able to make much headway because it's hemmed in by the town, we've been able to preserve acreage over both on the Iowa attack, where they came from and their camp, as well as where the defenders and sort of the saviors of the fort came in and defended it as well. So this is what we're able to do bit by bit, acre by acre, is reconstruct these battlefields like a puzzle piece.
All right, we're going to back out of here and continue around the tour route. The south loop here makes exactly what it says, a loop. And so what they've done, they've fished us down here across the attack area of Carr's division, Eugene Carr's division, against the Railroad Redoubt, Lawler's brigade, and so on. But they've put us out down here back on basically what is Confederate Avenue, a continuation of Confederate Avenue along the Confederate lines. So you're seeing 30th Alabama Confederate line. You're going to see Stephen D. Lee up here, the statues and so on. This is another area that's cut out, which is really wonderful because you can see there's Thomas Wall, the Texan. Here will be Stephen D. Lee. You can see the intricacies of the land and so on really well here. And in fact, it's in this area that some of the Union attacks on the 22nd, Osterhaus's division and so on, there's kind of ridges from this main ridge that we're sitting on. They're kind of fingers that extend out, and they will actually come up the lowlands in several of these fingers. And the reports talk about, the lay of the land just vividly, and then you can come out of here, you can just see it just perfectly, exactly what they were talking about. Now, for any Alabamians out there, there's the Alabama Monument. Beautiful, beautiful monument here. Stephen D. Lee's brigade is Alabama brigade that defends this area. Here, you're starting to see Kentucky up ahead. We won't have time to go out there, but they're Kentuckians on both sides, of course, and the idea was to meet in the middle and have the two most famous sons maybe of Kentucky, certainly dealing with the Civil War, out there meeting. So there's a statue of Abraham Lincoln and a statue of Jefferson Davis right there together out there, as well as busts of other Kentucky generals such as Jacob Lawman. I believe Lawman, certainly probably the most famous is John C. Breckinridge, former vice president and presidential candidate in 1860. Here is the only Confederate fortification of those 9 major fortifications that is not on a major road, and there's a little bit of a salient of the Confederate lines here, and so this square fort, or also known as Fort Garrett, will be here, not on a roadway, but to kind of hold that salient. And so you see Garrett here, Isham W. Garrett. Unfortunately, it's named for him because he is killed here. This is the other Confederate general officer. He has actually been promoted to brigadier general, but his promotion is past the Senate and all that in Richmond, but news hasn't reached Vicksburg yet. So he's been promoted, he just doesn't know it, but he's killed here, and unfortunately the fort's named after him. Always remember Ed Bars, he says, you never want a fort named after you, because that means you got killed in it, basically, you know. So square fort here. There you see the Georgia monument. Actually, the Confederate lines and actually Confederate Avenue, do you see this roadway continuing on to the right out in there? Way back when the park was first established, Confederate Avenue, and Union Avenue for that matter, a little bit, would continue on all the way to the Mississippi River south of the park. There was a big bunch of park on the south end that was part of the original park, but was later in the 1960s traded by the Park Service to the city of Vicksburg for land up around the U.S.S. Cairo up there. And the problem was Vicksburg, if the Confederate entrenchments ring Vicksburg and all the Confederate entrenchments are in the national park, Vicksburg's kind of stopped from growing. You know, you either have to leap over or something. So they worked out this trade, and the whole southern end of the park is no longer park. It used to be park, but it's no longer park, which is unfortunate. I'm guessing, you know, that was wish they had a do-over there. You can still go down on what is called Mission 66 Road now, and it looks very parky. It has monuments and tablets all over the side of it and so on. But if you continued out that road just right there, you would hit modern Vicksburg and Mission 66 Road to continue on down the rivers, to the river. Now, the reason that was traded is because, I don't want to say less important, but there were no assaults against it, and there were only a couple of approaches, Heron's approach and Lawman's approach down there. So much less action down there than the major part up here. So they kept the major part in the national park. Now, this is kind of an interesting area. I'm not sure how much you can see. I'm gonna kind of pull up here. You can see these trenches, and I mentioned earlier the zigzag trenches. Do you see how they're zigging and zagging there, trying to reach toward the square fort here, or Fort Garrett? This is known as Hovey's approach. There's a total of 14 different approaches. Now, you read different historians, and they'll say 13 or 12 or whatever, and so on. But one of those was started and abandoned very, very quickly. Others will meld together and so on. But there's a total of 14 different approaches. This one is known as Hovey's approach. All right, now we are in between Confederate lines and Union lines here. Of course, you see entering Union lines. So in this small loop on the south end down here, we're getting back into Union territory, 13th Corps. And we get a monument to some Indianans up here. This is Hovey's division, which 24th Indiana, 34th, I can't remember exactly which ones. That is Indiana Governor, Indiana monument there. Love these old bridges and so on down in here. These date back to a long time ago in the early history of the park. You can see just to our right, I don't know if you can see it or not, that's the interstate just right there. So, I mean, we are very close to civilization. Of course, in the summer, you're not going to be able to see through all of that. But it's well that this has been preserved, because if it hadn't, all this would be overgrown with urbanization now and be completely lost. And there are still pockets of areas available that the trust is working hard on and has preserved. Some of it just right around here. Here's an area, if you look kind of to the front, you can kind of see some more of the zigging and zagging on Hovey's approach. There are two angles of Hovey's approach. So here you can kind of get a view from this side of it as well. Across the field over there, you'll also have some remnants of Slack's approach. James Slack is brigade commander in Hovey's division as well. That Slack's approach is only started very late in the siege, and it doesn't amount to just a whole lot, but it is another one of those approaches. That's Alvin Hovey. Again, back on the line of circumvallation, the initial Union line as it's held. Now, as they progress forward with these approaches, periodically they will create new parallel lines with the Confederate line. These will be called parallels, and they will fill them with troops and artillery. Basically, you're inching closer and closer and closer. And the idea is that by actually July the 6th, Grant has named that date as a new assault date. And so as we get closer and closer and closer to the Confederate lines, the idea is that we're going to be able to pop up just within a matter of a few feet of the Confederate lines and hopefully be over their fortifications before they can respond. At least one volley, you know, is all they'll be able to get off. So that's the hope there. Of course, John Pemberton realizes this and says that we're not going to be able to withstand another attack, and so we better go ahead and surrender. And in fact, he does on July the 3rd, starts the process, and will surrender on July the 4th. And it's down in this area, as I understand it, that this big reunion was held in 1917. Thousands and thousands of veterans came back and camped in this area, ate huge amounts of barbecue and food and all that, and I believe got in a little bit of a squabble over things. The fight was renewed a little bit down in here, but it resulted, of course, in the leftover money getting the arch that we see at the beginning of that we saw at the beginning of the tour. Okay, continuing here on these monuments on this Union line, Daniel Lindsay, various busts and so on. We've got the only other equestrian, Lionel Sheldon, the only other equestrian monument on the park to a general officer will be McClernand right up here. Now this Iowa monument to the right will have a cavalryman carrying the flag. Very beautiful monument there to Iowa, but that's nobody in particular, so, you know, I mean, it is an equestrian monument. But the one, if you look off to the right, let me show you, you can see a little bit of the remnants of the leftmost of Carr's approach. The right one will go down the railroad, this one will go over these hills. But you see John A. McClernand here. The statue right in front of him, I don't know if you saw it or not, is E.O.C. Ord, who took his place. But that equestrian statue there is of John A. McClernand, 13th Corps commander, who was, of course, relieved of command on June the 19th. Again, put up by the state of Illinois. Everybody says, well, why isn't there a monument to Sherman? Why isn't there one to McPherson and so on? It's not the federal government that's doing this. Now, the federal government will put up the tablets and the artillery and so on, but in terms of the monuments themselves, it is up to the individual states. So the state of Ohio, for whatever reason, decided not to put up a monument to William T. Sherman or James B. McPherson. here at Vicksburg. Of course, there are monuments to both of those in Washington, D.C. There's Eugene Carr, Division Commander, and of course here is where we're coming back into where we branched off to go on the loop, crossing the railroad here again, the Southern Railroad of Mississippi. So that's gonna pretty much finish our tour. The Visitor Center is just right across Clay Street here, and as soon as we go under this bridge, we will be right back at the Visitor Center. It's kind of interesting. You'll see tablets all over, even down in here. George Boomer was killed right in here. I don't know if you can see right up on the bank of Clay Street right there is a tablet, a bronze tablet. It says George Boomer was killed right on this spot. Well, up in the cemetery, there's a blue tablet to Boomer's Brigade over on this side, right up here, and it says George Boomer was killed on this spot. So, was he killed twice? Obviously not. And some of these markers and so on could have been moved. They could have been very close together initially, and because of the widening of Clay Street or something like that, could have been moved. So after hours, when the park closes down, the gate will close, but it will open up by motion and let us out. And we are back here at the Visitor Center. Vicksburg has surrendered July the 4th. That's going to come on the heels of the great Union victory at Gettysburg the day before. And so July 1864 is quite the month for the Union cause. Add into that, of course, the operations around Middle Tennessee, the Tullahoma Campaign, and which is very successful in pushing Bragg's army out of Middle Tennessee in the Tullahoma operation, and that's gonna net a whole lot of territory all the way down nearly to Chattanooga, of course. So lots and lots of success for the Union forces here in the summer. Thank you for coming on the tour with us. Hope you've enjoyed it. What would be better, of course, is for you to make your way down to Vicksburg itself and tour the battlefield. It's a wonderful place. The Park Service has historically done a wonderful job. We're going back to the War Department from when it was established in 1899. And the American Battlefield Trust is doing a wonderful job, too, of adding on to the periphery and preserving as much land as we possibly can. So thank you, Battlefield Trust, for your efforts as well. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.